Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. This is Melly Hardy, CEO of the Pacific Asia Travel Association, with Professor John Kadolski, who's with us today as a special advisor to PATA. For those of you who are familiar with the organization and familiar with this forecast, welcome. For those who are not, let me explain briefly who we are and what we do. The Pacific Asia Travel Association is an organization that was founded in 1951 in Hawaii and relocated to Bangkok in 1998. Our focus is the development of tourism, sustainable and responsible tourism across the Asia Pacific region. For several decades already, PATA has been producing on a yearly basis a 5-year annual forecast looking at the tourism arrivals from various destinations. What is amazing about the PATA forecast is the accuracy of it over the years. If you compare the results compared to what was forecasted, we are within a 2% margin error rate, which is pretty good if you're in the world of statistics. Obviously, this year, there will be tons of questions, I'm sure, from all of you of the current situation with the coronavirus, and we'll try our best to answer as many of your questions as possible. But now I'd like to actually hand over to Professor Kadolski, who will share with us what insights from our current forecast and share with us a little bit about the situation with the virus and what we can forecast in the short term and medium term. So thank you very much, Professor Kadolski. Up to you.
Thank you, Mario. Okay. Yeah, we'll go straight into the first series of slides. You don't need to see me, that's for sure. And for those interested, I'm, as you heard from Mario, I'm a special advisor to PATA, and I'm also involved with the School of Tourism in Sichuan in China. In fact, in a little country town called Leshan. So Leshan Normal University, and that little country town, that little country university has 15,000 students. So scale is very, very much different when it comes to talk about things in Thailand. Okay. I can't press that one, I'll press this one. Welcome to the year of the white metal rat, and in keeping with what this white metal rat is all about, it certainly started off with issues, controversy, concerns, and so forth. So if you're a believer in those sorts of almanacs and the like, this is just the start of what could be a very tempestuous year for everybody, not just the travel and tourism industry. The agenda is reasonably short. I want to go through and have a look at where we ended up at the end of 2019, and this is based on data from the UNWTO. Then I'd like to look at some of the forecasts that PATA produces for the years 2020 to 2024 inclusive. And then we have to obviously talk about some of the mitigating factors. What is there that's happening out there now? We all know what that is. And what could we reasonably expect to have some sort of impact on travel and tourism, positive and or negative, into that future 5-year period. So this is how we ended up in the last almost 2 decades. You can see that the UNWTO tells us that we approached, where we actually achieved 1.461 billion international tourist arrivals. Now, a quick digression. The UNWTO talk about tourist arrivals, so they're interested in those who have at least one night in the destination. PATA, when we get to the PATA forecasts, talk about visitor arrivals, which means that anyone who crosses an international border could stay 1 day, could stay 10 days, could stay 5 hours, and then returns. So there's a difference in the methodology. PATA uses visitors because the belief is that anybody who crosses an international border has some sort of impact, economic, social, whatever you like, some good, some bad, some indifferent, but there is an impact. That really is what PATA is interested in understanding. So you can see the progression between 2010 and 2019 has been relatively strong over that entire period. And if we go back to what we saw last year, that has not been updated to 2019, but if you look at that red line, that shows what the actual count is. The blue line is the forecast, which was released a few years ago, but it intimated that by 2030, we'd be approaching 1.8 million international tourist arrivals. Now, I did a bit of fiddling around with some figures. I said, well, what if we progress from that point at 1% global growth? Well, we wouldn't reach 1.8 until past 2030. If it was 2%, we'd reach it in 2029. If it was in 3%, we'd reach it in 2026. And if it was at 4%, which is what we are running at currently, then we're liable to achieve that sort of volume of arrivals by 2024, other forces notwithstanding. So it's very much going to depend upon how the international community decides to deliver its demand. Is it going to keep growing at 4%, or is it going to reduce, or could it possibly increase to over 4%? We don't know at this moment, but you can see, whichever way you look at that, we're approaching 1.8 billion. In fact, we're approaching 2 billion. It's probably closer to the mark. And there are a lot of questions that come from that, and hopefully we'll get to them later. So if we look at who performed and who didn't perform, well, the way PATA looks at, for example, the first one on the left-hand chart, you see WA, West Asia. That's the parlance that PATA uses. The UNWTO regards that as Middle East. We use the UN definitions or country classifications, and hence we refer back to West Asia. And if you think about that, think about the old name of Turkey. Turkey in the days past was known as Asia Minor. So there's still debate and controversy about what is West Asia and what is Europe and so forth. That's how we look at it at PATA. And you can see in terms of the actual growth, ITA, International Tourist Arrival, 2019 over 18, you can see that West Asia did remarkably well. Southeast Asia, all the dark blue ones are those that fall within the geographic area of Asia Pacific. The light blue are the different ones. And you can see, with the exception perhaps of Central America at minus 1.8, Oceania, which grew at under the average of 4% at 2.7 and so forth. But there were a number of destinations, sub-regions within Asia Pacific that performed well above the global average. But percentage growth is an issue. By itself, it doesn't really tell you a whole lot, because 100% growth could be based on one visitor last year and 2 visitors this year or something like that. So you need to understand, what does this mean in terms of the additional volume generated? And here on the right-hand side, you can see that in the last 12 months, there's a slight change. Europe doing very well, certainly southern and the Mediterranean part of Europe. But Southeast Asia is in there, adding more numbers to its inbound volume. West Asia, North America, and so forth. So it's a mixed bag depending upon which way you look at it. Our preferred approach is to consider the percentage growth as well as what does that mean in volume terms, which is why we tend to look at both on a particular slide. Now, what this means is that if we rejig the destination sub-regions into a PATA parlance, where we include North America, Central America, South America, but exclude the Caribbean, then you can see this is the sort of performance that we've had. And you can see the volume of arrivals in 18 and 19 and the change in percentage terms and in terms of volume terms. So all said, a reasonable performance, particularly in the case of Asia, which you can see there at 5.1% annual change across the group, adding 20 million additional tourist arrivals to its count, is a fairly solid performance if you're looking at those metrics. Another way to look at it in terms of destination region, Asia Pacific versus rest of the world, you can see that Asia Pacific had a growth rate of about 3.9% between 2018 and 2019. The rest of the world 3.7, and we're talking about a global average of about 3.6, so marginal differences there. When it comes to the volume change between 18 and 19, you can see that the rest of the world still takes the majority share, driven largely by Europe, of course. But Asia Pacific is doing fairly well, gathering 44% of the net growth in international tourist arrivals over that period. And all this stems back to the fact, well, how have we been performing over that period? And you can see, if we look at the global share, Asia Pacific has jumped from 41.5 to 42.5. Now, it's important to know that that proportion has increased at the same time as the volume, the absolute number of international tourist arrivals has grown. So you look at that and you go, big deal, 1%. Well, it's 1% increase in share, while if you look at the header line, the international tourist arrivals over that period have grown by 53.5%. So the pie is getting bigger, and the Asia Pacific part of that pie is growing along with it. It's also getting bigger. Yes, okay, you'll have access to these slides, so don't worry too much about trying to understand everything that's going on. But what we're trying to do here is to show that their gross numbers at the international level. What does this mean in terms of some of the providers? And here, courtesy of STR, Smith Travel Research, on the top line, you've got the figures for January to December 2019. And you can see in terms of room occupancy rates, average daily room rate in US dollars, and RevPAR, revenue per available room, who's performing better than the others, if you will. But the secret lies in the bottom set of three charts, because that looks at the change. This is the change between 19 and between 18 and 19. So room occupancy rate in percentage point difference, there's a lot below the line. You look at ADR change in US dollars, there's a lot below the line. And you look at the all-important RevPAR figure, there's a lot below the line, and not too much above it of any significance. So it tells us, even with these numbers and adding in the domestic component, the hotel sector, at least, is having a bit of a job keeping up with what we think is increasing demand. Does that reflect a change in preference by international travelers? Sure, of course, we know that's happening. What about the shared economy? Is that having an impact? Yes, of course, in places it's having an impact. So all of these other factors now start to come in and change your perspective on what those numbers really mean. So if you just take one figure, percentage growth, and you say, well, aren't we clever? Look at what we did. We are fantastic. We are good. Yes. However, when you look at this, and then you add in this, and you add in that, maybe it's not that rosy a picture as you think it might be, certainly by sector. As I said, you will have access to these slides, so you can look at these in more detail in your own time. IATA tells us we only have the data through to November of 2019, but again, you can see that in terms of the total passenger market overview, as measured here, RPK, revenue passenger kilometre, ASK, available seat kilometre, passenger load factor, and so forth. You can see the total market, and you can see that international is double, almost double that of the domestic sector, and that it's actually grown reasonably well, 4.2%, but with domestic pushing that along a bit faster. When we start to look at the international component and look at Asia Pacific as they actually regard Asia Pacific, you can see that the RPKs, revenue passenger kilometres, 4.5% against an average of 4. Middle East, which we call West Asia, and North America, a little bit below that. So Asia Pacific, Asia and the Pacific, just those two groupings, are certainly helped drive a lot of the growth as indicated by the IATA data there. Aviation only. Closer to home, AAPA, the Association of Asia Pacific Airlines, a similar sort of figure where passengers moved, you can see as a growth of around about 4.2%, with RPKs about 4.1%. So everything is pointing in roughly the same direction. And it's saying that we're moving more people, there are more people crossing international borders, but our traditional supply in hotels and the like seems not to be performing in keeping with these sorts of demands. So what's going on? What is the impact of these other forms of accommodation and the like? Interesting questions. Right, that's the history lesson. The Asia Pacific visitor forecast, remember they're visitors, not tourist arrivals. This is anyone who crosses a border. They come to you in a variety of guises. The executive summary, the left-hand picture, that has already been released. The full report, which goes into much more detail at an annual and a quarterly basis, where 39 countries are covered with roughly an average of 20 origin markets per destination over a 5-year period, a lot of data. Those data charts and tables are included in the full report. That's due for release in a few weeks' time. Then we have specific destination reports, again, 39 of them, where you can look at one particular destination. Here I've got the cover for China, which takes more of those data, but also begins to factor in other components, such as what is the inbound flight frequency? What is the inbound flight capacity in terms of airline seats? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Which markets are growing? And so forth. So far more detail. So the three together give you a very, very good feel for what we believe will be a likely scenario out to 2024. For those forecasts, the years that you see 2014 to 2018 are actual forecasts. The year 2019 are expected outcomes based on the best available data at the time of casting the forecasts, and then the actual forecast of the years 20 to 24. That's our geographic coverage, the Americas, the Pacific, and Asia, of course. So 39 individual destinations, not countries, destinations, because in there we include, of course, Hong Kong, SAR, Macau, China, and so forth. Another way of looking at the distribution is that if we just look at how many destinations in the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific, that's the sort of distribution we've got. If we look at it by IVAs, it changes a little bit. There's a lot more countries that we cover in the Pacific, but in terms of their numeric value, they're far lower. But it's still quite skewed towards Asia, and with the Americas coming in at 22%. The process hasn't changed in a number of years because it's been so effective. As you heard Mario say, 2% of actual is very, very good at the Asia Pacific level. So we go through a quantitative process where we look at the type of model to apply. Will the data handle that model, or will the model handle that data more correctly? But then we have a quantitative component where experts look at it and say, this is nonsense, that can't happen because of this, and this, the impacts of which have not been felt yet, but will. And when those two come together, it's been shown to have a marked improvement on the robust nature of the forecast, which is why we continue with it. So that's all about the forecasts. And this is what they're saying. By 2024, on the conditions or under the conditions of when these forecasts were first produced, it could go somewhere towards 972 million arrivals. We're getting close to 1 billion arrivals within the next 5-year period. Certainly it's on the horizon. There's no two ways about that. However, let's address the elephant in the room, particularly now. Coronavirus. What impact is this likely to have? What impact, in fact, is it having at the moment on tourism flows? Well, we know a little bit about the as they call it now, the 219 nCoV, CoV being coronavirus, N being novel or novel, new, we didn't know about it before, and 2019, the year in which it first appeared. We know its distribution. The numbers are small at that point, January 29. They are changing, but it's important to understand we need to keep track of that, because when the numbers begin to reduce, tells us that, okay, maybe we've passed the critical period, maybe we're about to turn around. We saw it previously with SARS, with MERS, and with other things. So we're really looking now for when is that inflection point at which the infections are no longer spreading as rapidly as they did at the first outbreak. For those of you who are interested, if you're attending ITB Berlin, I know Dr. Peter Tarlow, a colleague of ours and someone that Padre has worked with in the past, is conducting a safer tourism roundtable, I believe it is. So be aware that there is something already lined up to be discussed by disaster specialists, if you like, and recovery leaders at ITB Berlin next month. So that's just an unpaid advertisement for Peter Tarlow, and the fact that it's being addressed at these sorts of fora is particularly important. What are the issues with the coronavirus? Well, cities are closed. We know there's no one coming in or going out of Wuhan except for evacuation purposes. Some countries have closed their borders already. We know that China is no longer selling outbound tourism at all, period, end of story. We're seeing flights being reduced or in fact stopped in some cases. Emergency evacuations are occurring. We're also seeing hysteria fueled by social media, and that's leading to some irresponsible behavior. And that's a big, big issue. It really is. People, when they panic, they get scared, they're fearsome, they behave in totally irrational ways. And there's enough information available on that without me going into further. Racism is resurfacing in some areas. Even if you look Asian, doesn't matter if you're Chinese, if you look Asian in some destinations, you're being shunned, you're being asked to get off buses, get off trains, etc., etc. There's panic buying food, water, gloves, masks. In fact, trying to find those commodities now is it's quite difficult in certain parts of certainly of China, but not just China. And I can tell you this because I live in China. I arrived from China last night, and I can tell you that the checks that they have, not just at the airport, but even as I left Leshan, which is a 2-hour car drive to get into Chengdu to fly out, we were stopped on the highway at intervals, and everyone in the vehicle was spot checked for temperature fluctuation. So there's a lot of work being done to try and contain this. But we're at the stage now where misinformation is merged with information. We don't really know what the reality is. So it's imperative that in any evaluation of the condition, you look at the source, CDC, for example. You look at the source and know that it's valuable and it's verifiable and it's truthful. That's the final point. We have uncertainty as the real situation. We know where we are now, but we need to know where we're going to be in 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, and so forth. For that reason, not just that reason, but ever since these forecasts have been produced for PATA by Hong Kong PolyU, they've produced what we call interval forecasts. So most of the numbers we look at are baseline forecasts, the ones in the middle. But there were lower bounds and there are upper bounds. And when you read the reports, you'll see there's discussion about a worst case scenario versus a best case scenario. But the feeling is that we're going to be somewhere in there, okay? Unless this drags out and becomes an extremely long, drawn-out occurrence, then we still believe that over the life of the forecast, the 5 years, we've got a better than average chance of staying within the 2% average. What that looks like is this. Here's one indication. Now, bear in mind that there are 39 destinations covering 5 years with 20 source markets into each of those destinations. Each one of those has an interval between lower, base, and upper. Here is just India to Thailand. So you can see, while we're projecting 2.9 million arrivals in 2024, under a worst case scenario, it could be 2.6. Under a best case scenario, it could be 3.5. So we try and factor in uncertainties, and there's a certain methodology to this risk measurement, if you like, that is based in quite detailed statistics. So bear in mind that when we talk about the numbers, we're talking about the orange ones, the baseline. So what this means is that we believe that the forecasts will remain valid, apart from a few extreme cases when you get down to origin, market, and destination. We know there are significant efforts being made now to contain it. It does not appear to be as virulent as the SARS coronavirus. In other words, while you've got people infected, the majority of them are actually recovering. Those that do not recover, that actually die from it, tend to be in cases where they're elderly, they have a compromised immune system or something else. So it doesn't appear to be as nasty, if you like, as SARS. We also believe that the impact is likely to be short-lived with an S-shaped recovery curve. And the S-shape comes from the fact that we go through a dip and then we power back up and often exceed where we were prior to the event occurring. So with all of that, we still maintain that there's confidence in these forecasts. As an aside to that, if you know where we were predicting that you would be in any given period, and then you understand where you actually ended up, you have a very good mechanism for determining the real loss in visitation, and from that, the impact on your economy and the like. So valuable in a number of ways. What we know from IATA, and here we're talking about past pandemics, as you can see, it's an index where the crisis month, 0.0 there is marked at 100. Look at this SARS, the blue line, and you can see what we mean by going along nicely, impact. It drops dramatically and then slowly climbs back to a faster rate of growth. And that's what we're talking about. We need to find that turn point at which it's bottomed out, and we can begin to put strategies in place that will stimulate the speed at which we can recover and get out of that worst case scenario. But we've been there before. This is part of data which comes from the NTOs, the National Tourist Offices, and the National Statistics Agencies, collated by PATA. And you can see this is the index of visitor arrivals into Southeast Asia by month, where we're talking about December. The 12 months ended in December 2001. You can see what's been going on there. And you can see, again, that sort of S bend where it bottoms out, picks up, peaks, and then goes on a stronger trajectory thereafter. That's what we're looking forward to, and certainly hopeful can happen sooner rather than later. If I go back, you can see that the period of time there with SARS was about 6 to 7 months. We're hoping we can certainly shorten that period. Right, so on to the actual forecasts proper. This is international visitor arrivals into Asia Pacific. I'm going to go very quickly here, bearing in mind that you actually have access to these data. I want to get through this so that we can get into some questions and the like. But This is what it looks like. The blue line, the dark blue, is the projection for 2019 based on best available data. The light blue is the actual as given to us by the NTOs and the NTAs, and the green are the projections. This is why we're talking about approaching $1 billion over that 5-year period. Left-hand side, annual change, and right-hand side, annual change in volume. Now you can see that it's been bouncing around in annual change percentage terms, left-hand side, and we're expecting that there will be some return to a little bit of normality. Now, that normality doesn't mean it's going to go from 5.1 to 6.2. It might go from 5.1 to 7.1 and then back to 6.3. It bounces around that sort of level of growth. But you can see overall, the change in the expected volume is quite significant. Index that, and you can see it's a pretty strong, powered growth curve. It's not straight line, it's actually bending up. So momentum has been growing. By destination region, you can see that the bulk of that on an index basis, the bulk of the growth is into Asia. There's good growth in the Pacific and the Americas as well, but not at the same level as into Asia. There's a summary chart, and it simply looks at those previous charts in a numeric format. But you can see we're talking about significant volume increases. Between 2014 and 19, 162 million more. Between 2019 and 24, 257 million more. I mean, that's pretty significant. And it also shares, it also shows us that in terms of 19 to 24, the relative shares, Asia, not surprisingly, is picking up a number of percentage points. Doesn't mean that the Pacific and the Americas are not growing. They are. They're simply not growing as fast as Asia. We also need to know, and this is a very significant chart because it breaks it down into where are they coming from by region. And you'll see that green one there, which says others. Now, a lot of destinations, they have 10 or 15, 20 destinations, and then everything else gets put into this others category. The fact that it's growing that much faster tells us that maybe we need to start rethinking about which markets we are reporting on. So there's a strong point to make to the NTOs that let's have a look at some of these others. Let's group them into last 5 years. Which ones have we got coming into the destination? It's no longer business as usual. Everything is changing. We need to understand how that's changing. But again, you can see on these curves, the second one, the grey one, Asia into Asia Pacific is also growing very strongly. It also has numeric volume as well as a rate of growth. So that's where the money is looking at right now. And here again are the numbers for those that want to get a little bit more detail about that. Okay, relative share, I'm going to really cycle now because I've got the sort of wind-up signal. You can see relative share of additional IVAs into Asia Pacific, additional. The relative share in 2019, Asia takes it, it's going to grow. The Americas, the others and so forth, they're smaller, it's Asia. In the Americas, we're expecting growth. That's what it looks like. It bounces around a little bit, but you know, an average of say 7 million or more per annum over that period. USA dominates. Mexico next, and Mexico is doing strong things. You can see the share difference, 29.6 to 34.8. Significant happenings in Mexico. By source region, there's that others category again, particularly driven by Mexico. We need to look at that. In terms of into the Americas, the relative share, Americas to Americas, is very intra-regional. And that's going to drop a little bit as others start to grow, but it's still very much an intra-regional market. And for the 5 top source destination pairs, in terms of AAGR, Pakistan to Mexico has got a strong growth rate, but Cuba into Mexico, India into Mexico. This is average annual growth rate So the numbers are probably much smaller, with the exception there of Mexico to USA, which dominates the volume increase over that period of time. Asia, that's what we cover. They're the destinations that we cover, and a similar sort of thing. Growth, change over time, significant volume increases over the years. The index, you can see very clearly West Asia, which in this context refers just to Turkey. We know what happened there in 2016, but look how it's powering back. Even so, South Asia, wow, things happening in South Asia, also Southeast Asia, and Northeast Asia, with the bulk of the volume is plodding along quite nicely. Again, a summary table there for your review. But jumping from 129 additional, 229 million additional between 14 and 19 to 215, almost 215 over the next 5 years. A lot going on. And same, that's dominated by Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia in particular is sneaking up. It's expanding quite rapidly. And source regions, Asia to Asia. Again, intra-regional. The Asian travellers are fueling very much the growth in arrivals into Asia. And you can see it's dominated by Greater China. So mainland China, Hong Kong, Macau, and Chinese Taipei. So you can see the significance of those flows. Remove them, however, just take the Greater China flows out, and you can see there's Singapore, Malaysia. Oh, I didn't get the chart there on the right. I do apologise. China, Thailand in 19 and so forth. It differs. I don't know what's happened. I think that's actually the same. There's no change in the mix, right? But the volume is very much growing faster. Northeast Asia. That should be Southeast Asia, I think, looking at that. I apologise. I didn't change the header. Okay, let's get into South Asia. Let's see what's happening there. India, we're expecting big things there, but don't discount Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal. Bhutan will go along slowly. South Asia, that's what we look at in terms of AAGRs, very, very large. And a lot of flows, Bangladesh to India. But look at Portugal, India, different markets, interesting. India, Maldives, different combination. That's what we're looking at. It is not business as usual. I don't know what happened to my slide deck there. I apologise for that. Southeast Asia, you can see what's happening. Thailand, still dominant, expected to remain as such, but losing a little bit as Vietnam in particular barrels up the list, and it's becoming very, very popular, as is Cambodia. So we're seeing a lot of interest into Cambodia as well. And you can see there. West Asia is just Turkey, so that's why I haven't gone any further. This is the one I really want to get into, source markets. Green, others, we know why. Okay, but look at what's really growing here. Asia, Africa, don't discount Africa. It's going to be a way off, but it is growing. And again, for those interested, the table is there for you. Relative share of international visitor arrivals into Asia by source region, Asia to Asia, we know that. Relative share is going to increase. In the Pacific, similar sort of thing. Going through all of them. Again, here, we're looking at Oceania is the big one at the moment, driving that. Polynesia is going to be a little lower. We can see what's happening there with the shares. Into Asia is now dominant. It's the one destination sub-region that goes against the trend and is not so much fueled by intra-regional activity. It's really fueled by Asia and the Americas with the Pacific as a backup. Destination pairs, Hawaii features largely, of course, but also New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand. They're very strong and expected to remain so. Melanesia, Fiji dominates, expected to continue as such with both Australia and New Zealand into Fiji. Micronesia dropped a little bit, but we expect it to start coming back with Guam losing some share, Northern Marianas Islands picking up some share, and Palau more or less constant. And you can see from where. Oceania, same. Australia, New Zealand. So not surprising to see some of these Australia, New Zealand flows, New Zealand, Australia flows. It's changing. Polynesia, Hawaii. Let's take Hawaii out because it's so big, it really skews the data. And you see some interesting changes. Not so much in terms of who's going where, but where they rank in terms of size and volume. Right. So what's making all this possible? Well, we know that international air seats were growing, but it's a waste of time trying to predict what's scheduled for 2020. It's changing. Planes are being taken off this route, put on that route, stopped on that route, and so forth. So we won't really know what's happened there until well into halfway through this year. Similarly, from 2019, the impacts of the 737 MAX being taken offline certainly being felt. But overall, the number of seats are still growing. Well, we know what some of these issues are because we've covered those before, but we've got others as well. It's not just the coronavirus. We've got trade conflicts, we've got weakened economies, we've got an election coming up in the US and other places, issues of sovereignty. People are concerned for their jobs. These robots are going to take over or not. The workplace is shifting in terms of how the different generations work together and fit with each other. And even things like retirement issues. Can't afford to retire, have to work till I'm 75. What does that mean for the incoming generation? So the whole world is going through an immense shift in focus, and that's being reflected to some degree in the type of travellers that we're seeing moving through the world at the moment. Good thing to know is that we do have good projections for the 10 top origin or source markets for Asia Pacific, and this is the volume increase between 2019 and 24, and you see how China is so significant. That will be felt, no two ways about it. Take China out, however, you've still got some others. You've got Korea, USA, Malaysia, and so forth. So there's still travel occurring, there's still huge potential out there, but you will have to be far more focused and certainly not reliant upon single source market for your business. That's all we've got. I think I'm on time. Thank you for your time and attention. And I think I'll pass back to Mario.
Yes, thank you, John. Thank you very much for sharing this very valuable information. I'm sure we have questions from the audience, which we'll take in a minute. But regarding the coronavirus, as I'm sure there's plenty of questions about that, just a little bit of advertisement for you. We will have another webinar on Thursday at 4 o'clock Bangkok time, specifically to address the issues of the coronavirus. We'll be joined by a representative from Forward Keys, who have actually forward bookings, looking at what are trending at the moment, what is real time happening. Are people actually canceling their trip or postponing their trips? These are questions that will be answered on Thursday during that call. And we'll also be joined by a representative from 2031, which is a specialty research business, who will actually share with us some tips of what destinations can do today to prepare themselves for the recovery. But now, actually, if you have any questions, we'll address them. I'll ask my colleague Per if she can actually open up the questions for us.
Okay, well, let me go. Bruno. Hi, Bruno. How are you, my friend? What is the outlook on India for the next few years in both directions, inbound and outbound? It's strong. There's no two ways about that. So a good place to focus right now, absolutely. Buy the report. There is a specific report on India. That will give you all you need to know, plus. Otherwise, send me an email and we'll see what we can do. Have we got? From Lombok, Tourism Polytechnic, how can we deal with the external factors of the tourism business, such as earthquakes? PATA in the past has actually convened task forces that look specifically at after a critical event, what can we do to actually hasten the speed of recovery? The first thing about that is stay out of it until the experts have cleaned up and made the area safe for residents and for future visitors. But here also, if we begin to look at the forecasts and then the actual, we can begin to see after some sort of intervention effect, which markets recover faster than others. And that's what it gets back to. We know there'll be a recovery. We don't know when that will be. And we need to put ourselves into the best possible position so that we can hasten that recovery. By understanding your markets and the way they respond to various negative impacts is one way that you can really hone in and focus on your recovery strategies and marketing factors. They're going to be with us. There's no two ways about it. It'll be this or that or something else. There'll always be something. The trick will be to weather it, let the experts recover and fix the problem. Then we start talking about how can we hasten recovery. But a word of warning, hastening the recovery is not always about how many more you're getting. We're changing now into looking at length of stay. How can we get people coming into an area and staying there longer? That stimulates local economy. It has a positive impact. So we need to think differently about this as well. Louisa Go, how will this help in boosting trade shows industry? Well, it won't in the short term, but in the longer term, as you saw from that ITB seminar, there will be a gathering of experts that can talk about, well, what can we do? How can we do it? Who can help us? What needs to be done? And so again, longer term, it can actually help us because we can become more resilient to these sorts of impacts. But in the short term, everything is going to be hurt. No question about that. Faizan, interested in Philippines, same thing. There's more information on the actual Philippines report, but the bigger report. It's positive. There's no question. Positive. It's positive for the Philippines. FSM, Federated States of Micronesia, Bermans, Aldis. Yeah, we can give you specific information on the forecast, but how do we use that in terms of getting carriers to open up a new route? There are models that are actually being used where you can factor in things such as expected demand and what that might mean. What sort of aircraft could you put on a route? What's the frequency of that route? Have a look at some of those models. I know Australia has done a lot of work on that through the Bureau of Transport Economics, and we've in fact used some of those models to then go to an airline and say, look, we've done the numbers, and we think based on these demand projections, you've got capacity here for an A321 and the like. But you've got to go in armed with some hard facts and hard figures and get away from this. I think this would be a good idea. I'd like to see a twice weekly flight. Not going to happen that way. Okay. That's how you use the data. Okay, this is a very good one from Sabah. Very nice place. Been to Sabah. How to develop tourism product to meet with the upcoming market segments? Great question. We're done with product. Product is a vehicle to give you an experience. So you start focusing on what experiences do these people want from their trip to Sabah? What do they want to feel? What do they want to become a part of? And the product is simply the vehicle that delivers that experience to them. Slight change in mindset, excuse me, but very important to make that change in mindset. Jyoti would like to understand the online penetration in coming years. It's going to get stronger, it's going to get better, but the old ways, the traditional ways of doing things are not going away. It's a combination of the two. In fact, in some markets, we're seeing that a lot of the research about a destination is done online, and then they certainly look at friends and relatives. The word of mouth is still very important. But then they go to other means for actually booking. The more complex the booking process, 3 or 4 destinations, different types of activities, then that's when you need an expert. You don't want a travel agent. You want a memory maker. You want a travel designer to produce something specifically for you. Right? And the more complicated that is, then that's a better way to go, because you have some security should something happen. There's an airline stops a route. How do you get out of that? You will see more of that, but it's a combination of the two. Okay, it's not one or the other. Joanne from Travelport, how do visitors book their journey? Again, some do it online. If I'm flying, as I do, from Chengdu to Bangkok to come and meet with Mario, then I do it online myself. But if I'm doing a multi-destination or a longer duration trip, then I go to someone that I trust that will give me a good deal. What are the key user experiences that are valued most? That's how long is a piece of string? There are people that will travel just to try some different food. There were people who will travel just to see a wilderness and to experience a wilderness. It's as varied as your imagination can make it, and the destination that is on offer. How are we going for time? Okay. Okay. Tomahawk, Carmen White, predictions for growth into both Australia and New Zealand. It looks like Australia is going to be a little bit stronger than New Zealand, but don't discount New Zealand. It's moving up there. It's a long way off challenging Australia in terms of visitor numbers, but maybe it wants it that way because it's got a very, very considered outlook on what does a visitor bring to New Zealand, and it's not all in the numbers of how many, but what do they like? What do they want to experience? Do they help stimulate local economies? Do they travel regionally? All of these things. If you want ideas on that, go and have a look at the New Zealand website. They're doing a heck of a job, I can tell you on that. Okay, Tourism Malaysia, Masrina. Okay, demographics and psychographic profiles. Oh, wow. If we had a couple of weeks, we could probably go through that. It varies dramatically. The important thing to understand is that geography no longer becomes as important as it did in the past. In other words, if I'm a bird watcher, I can be a bird watcher in Australia or Papua New Guinea or China or somewhere else. It's something else that clusters me into this type of person. And the things that turn me on would then be, wow, this is an untouched area and it's spotted this, white spotted, dove-tailed, whatever. I'd like to go and see that. Different motivations, different people. Others travel for food. They would like to experience the cuisine of a different place. They'd like to experience that cuisine with a local. So the whole dynamic is changing. It's a great question, but the answer is long, tedious, and we just simply don't have time for it. But it's something we could certainly explore. Key threats that prevent the projections. Well, right now, of course, it's the coronavirus, but there'll be something else, no doubt about it, which is why we do these interval forecasts.
John, if I can add maybe something specific to that, for those of you who are not familiar with it, I would encourage you to maybe look for the World Economic Forum annual risk report, which they produce every year. The 2020 report was just published after Davos, I believe, last week. And they looked at some of the greatest risk that affects not only the tourism industry, but the entire world at the moment. Many of these risks will be no surprise to you, or in relations to extreme weather pattern, to climate change, to natural disasters. So many of them in relation to that. Cyber security is also another issue that's been raised. Pandemic, of course, has just been added. It wasn't there at the beginning. It was too early. But those are actually risks that affects our sector and other industries also. Economic crisis also can have a major impact, fuel prices, and many others. So there are a lot of different factors that affects our industry. But as John explained before, we monitor trends over a long period of time, and our industry is extremely resilient. we've seen many crises over several past decades. And somehow after a period of time of 3, 6 months, sometimes a little bit longer to a year, not only we recover, but these numbers actually increase even faster and further. So that's something we need to keep in mind.
Thanks, Mario. That's a very important point. A great report, risk report. Yeah, everyone needs to be a risk manager now. We know something's going to happen. When it happens, what we need to do is to actually take the brunt of it and then start planning for the recovery. The sooner you start planning for that and targeting and focusing, then the more likely you are to come out of that with possibly a long-term advantage. So there's a lot to that. I've got time for one more, and this is going to be from Bin Marshwan, Asia Lotus Tours, how to sustainably develop the tourism source. Huge question. If you know the answer, please drop me an email. There's a number of things we can do. One of the things is to change what we are measuring. Instead of measuring the number of people coming into a destination, start cherry picking and go for those that have a longer length of stay, those that have a smaller footprint, those that want to be involved and respect the local culture, try the local food, and all this sort of thing. They add more value in terms of not only their experience, but also the experience to the local host community. They're great visitors. So we need to shift away from more is better. Not necessarily. You can get a lot more visitors who come in and they come into an Asian destination, but they want fish and chips or hamburgers and they don't want to try the local stuff. Oh, no, I won't do that. Why are you traveling? You want these cultural travelers, you want these eco-tourists, for want of a better word, but people who have a respect for the local community above all else. They want to be a part of it, they want to feel it, but they don't want to actually extract from it. That's one way, but there's a myriad others. Keep an eye on what Pata is coming up with over the next few years, because there's a lot more activity going into sustainability, and in fact the next level beyond sustainability, which is regenerative tourism. Start thinking about what that means, and yeah, as I said, keep an eye on Pata. There's good things happening there, but I can't brief you on right now. With that, Mario.
Thank you very much, John, for having spent the time with us this afternoon, having flown from China to spend the time with us for this webinar and share your insights into the forecast and in the industry. I'd like to touch on one point just to conclude on what John mentioned in terms of measurements. In the current forecast, but also more specifically the individual country report that we'll be publishing this year. In 2020, we've actually partnered with both Visa as well as Euromonitor to add some additional components and measurements into the reports, looking at econometrics, GDP contributions, and a few other points that have been added to the reports this year. As we move along into 2021, we hope to have more sustainability measurements also moving forward. So in 2020, we've already started to do a lot of needs assessment with several destinations within the ASEAN region already, to have in-depth discussions about what are the current measurements, but what are the future measurements that are needed for a more sustainable and responsible industry moving forward. So keep an eye on those, and we'll come out with more information as we move along over the next few weeks and month. And thank you very much for joining us today. Bye-bye.